David Calloway had everything: power, wealth, a name that opened doors across the world. But no amount of money could bring back his son. For 11 years he lived in silence, visiting Michael's grave, haunted by a death que ninguém musava questionar, until one day a stranger appeared. She didn't speak. She just left a single red flower on the tombstone. A child, unknown, but her eyes, those impossible, familiar eyes, told David that the past was not buried. It had only been waiting, a forgotten diary, a hidden drive, a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of his empire. What really happened to Michael? And why did Eleanor, the woman who once worked for David, vanish without a trace? This is not just a family mystery. It's the unraveling of a powerful system built on silence, betrayal, and loss. And now, standing beside the girl he never knew existed, David will go to war against the very empire he helped create. Stay with us until the end, because this story will make you question everything: truth, loyalty, and how far a man can go to protect what remains of his family. And before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? I didn't leave that flower, David muttered to himself, staring at the fresh red camellia resting delicately atop the marble slab. For 11 years, he had come to his son's grave every Friday, at the same hour, wearing the same grey coat that now clung to his aging frame like a memory he couldn't shake off. But never once had he seen anyone else there, until today. He had watched the girl from a distance, frozen in place as her small hand extended to place the flower with a tenderness that pierced something long dormant inside him. She looked no older than 10, her dark skin glowing subtly against the cold stone, her cobalt eyes glancing toward him just briefly, as if recognizing a connection deeper than words could express. He called out, "Wait!" But she turned, her long braids catching the air, and ran. David followed, stumbling through the rows of tombstones, calling again. She disappeared behind the angel statue marking the Wallace family crypt, but when he reached it, she was gone. In her place, lying in the grass where her foot had crushed a patch of moss, was an object catching the low afternoon light, a tarnished silver medallion shaped like a heart, cool to the touch and too heavy with meaning. David didn't open the medallion until he was back in the silence of his study, seated behind the wide mahogany desk that once belonged to his father. The scent of old wood and aged paper clung to the room, reminders of time passing, of permanence. His fingers trembled, not from age, but something closer to fear. When he pried it open, what stared back at him took the breath from his lungs. A photograph, faded yet unmistakable. Michael, no older than 15, smiling in a way David hadn't seen since before the accident. Next to him, an unfamiliar woman, mid-20s perhaps, her hand resting gently on Michael's shoulder as if claiming him, her hair curled tightly around her face, and her eyes, dark and watchful, seemed to hold stories he would never hear. On the back of the photograph, engraved with a trembling hand, were the words, "Forever, E." David sat there for minutes that felt like hours. The name, Eleanor, Emma, Evelyn, floating uselessly in his mind. He knew every friend Michael had, every teacher, every cousin. This woman was none of them, and yet her presence in this token left by the girl at the grave demanded a truth he hadn't known he was missing. He called Marcus, his longtime assistant, who answered before the second ring. "I need every employee record from 2014, David said without preamble, his voice low and urgent. "Look for anyone named Eleanor, or someone with an E who left suddenly." Marcus trained in years. Discretion didn't question the command. "Of course, sir, will you be at the estate?" David nodded, forgetting Marcus couldn't see him. "Yes, and Marcus, hurry." As he hung up, his eyes returned to the photo, drawn again and again to Michael's expression. There was joy there, real and unforced. It was not a smile meant for social occasions or company brochures. It was the look of a boy who trusted the person beside him. And David, who had spent over a decade analyzing the tragedy, realized that for the first time, he was beginning to suspect he didn't know the whole story. The official report had been clear: accidental overdose, no foul play, no suspicious activity. Yet how could this girl exist? This girl with Michael's eyes, and the medallion with a stranger's image, if all had been so neatly explained. He couldn't sleep that night. The house, usually his sanctuary of silence, felt oppressive. The portrait of Michael above the fireplace, painted just weeks before his death, seemed to watch him now with something other than innocence. David stood before it, glass in hand, untouched bourbon swirling as his mind tried to make sense of the puzzle forming at his feet. He remembered little details. The change in Michael's mood months before his death, the arguments over the phone with someone he wouldn't name, the nights David had heard him weeping through the walls but convinced himself it was part of being a teenager. He had buried those moments under years of logic and grief, but now they surfaced like bones disturbed by a plow. He couldn't ignore them anymore. The girl, the flower, the medallion, each demanded that he reopen wounds he had sealed shut with wealth and denial. For the first time in years, David felt something unfamiliar coil in his chest. Not grief, but urgency. The past had not rested, and now it was reaching for him. When the employee records arrived at dawn, he tore through them with the hunger of a man seeking air underwater. The list was long, hundreds of names that had passed through Callaway Industries during the fiscal year of Michael's death. Engineers, interns, temporary hires, most irrelevant. But then his eyes caught a line. Eleanor Davis, hired March, resigned abruptly in October, just 3 weeks after the funeral. Position, research assistant, Project Vega. He froze. Project Vega had been one of the firm's most secretive developments, biotech applications, gene mapping, not something interns touched. Why would a research assistant have access to anything near it, let alone develop a relationship with Michael? His son had never mentioned her, but there it was, a paper trail leading to a name he'd never heard, and yet felt carved into the edges of his memory now. He pressed the intercom. "Marcus, find everything you can on Eleanor Davis. Where she went, why she left, who she spoke to. Everything. No limits." The silence that followed felt like permission. Later that day, he returned to the cemetery, walking, slowly, not out of fatigue, but out of reverence. He examined the path where the girl had vanished. Nothing. No sign she had ever been there. Yet he knew what he saw. He placed the medallion gently at the base of the grave just for a moment, hoping the universe might reward the gesture with another glimpse of her. Nothing stirred. He retrieved it, heart heavy, when a voice startled him from behind. "You saw her too?" David turned. An elderly groundskeeper, his overalls stained with time and dirt, stood watching him with an expression that bordered on knowing. "What did you say?" David asked. The man stepped forward, pointing toward Michael's grave. "The girl. She comes sometimes, leaves flowers, disappears before I can ask her name." David's throat tightened. "You've seen her before?" The man nodded. 3 times. Always the same red flower. Always alone. David stared at the grave, the pieces spinning. Whatever haunted the edges of his son's death had just begun to resurface. Back at home, David opened the digital archives of Callaway Industries, accessing Project Vega's encrypted files. Most were locked behind biometric codes, but he still held master access. What he found disturbed him more than he cared to admit. Among the research reports and trial records, he uncovered notes written by Eleanor Davis herself, personal annotations in the margins, full of urgency and fear. Phrases like unreported reaction, subject deviating, and memory fragments resurfacing leapt from the screen, and worse, a draft letter never sent, addressed to David himself. "If something happens to me, know that Michael was trying to protect her. He knew more than he let on. I think he was getting close to remembering." The document cut off there. No date, no explanation. David leaned back in his chair, hands clenched. Who was her? The girl, a daughter, a clone, a secret child. The possibilities clawed at his reason. He stared out the window into the blur of falling leaves and whispered the name that had changed everything. Eleanor. And yet, despite everything he had uncovered, in the last 24 hours, one question refused to fade. Why now? Why, after more than a decade, had this child, this spectral mirror of his son, emerged? Had something triggered her? Had Eleanor survived, hidden all this time, waiting for a sign to send the girl? Or was the child acting on her own? David felt the weight of responsibility press on his shoulders again, heavier than it had ever been. He had buried Michael once, but now he feared that what lay beneath that stone was not just a boy, but a truth buried with him, a truth still alive in the eyes of a stranger who might not be a stranger at all. As night fell, David placed the medallion on his nightstand, unable to sleep. He closed his eyes, but saw only the girl's face, those impossible eyes, and the whisper of Eleanor's name brushing against his thoughts like a warning. Nothing is truly buried, not the past, not the dead, not the truth. I need the keys to her old apartment, David said sharply as he stepped into the corporate archives division, startling the young archivist at the desk. The man, no older than 30, looked up, recognizing the founder's face instantly, his hands fumbling nervously with the drawer. Eleanor Davis. She worked in internal audit. Year 2014, the building on 5th and Archer. The archivist hesitated. Sir, that unit was cleared years ago. It's likely been... David cut him off. I didn't ask for assumptions. I asked for the keys. A long pause followed until the man nodded, retrieved a dusty ring of labeled keys and placed them in David's palm without another word. David didn't bother with a thank you. He left with a focus so fierce it almost frightened him. The memory of Eleanor's name etched behind the photograph, the haunting note in the project files, and the ghost of the girl who might be his granddaughter. It all propelled him forward with a clarity stronger than grief. When he arrived at the building, it felt untouched by time. Inside, the air was stale, the furniture minimal, but something told him no one had ever truly cleared it. Not completely. David moved through the apartment slowly, every detail observed with the meticulous eye of someone used to uncovering hidden truths. He opened drawers, lifted cushions, checked behind paintings. Everything seemed deliberately clean, as if someone had wanted to erase Eleanor from existence. But as he examined the back panel of a built-in bookshelf, his fingers caught on a thin edge, a vertical seam, hollow. He retrieved a flathead screwdriver from his coat pocket, old habits from his days of early engineering, and carefully pried the panel loose. Inside was a gap no wider than his forearm, and at the bottom, wrapped in an aging cloth, was a small, leather-bound notebook. The pages were brittle, yellowing at the edges, and some had been torn out, but what remained was enough to change everything. The first page was a date, October 2nd, 2014, followed by the sentence, "They know I'm pregnant." David sat on the edge of the worn-out sofa, stunned. He flipped through the entries slowly, his eyes devouring every word, absorbing the pain, the paranoia, and the desperate urgency of a woman who had clearly feared for her life. One entry read, "Michael was never supposed to see the files, but he did. I warned him. I begged him to pretend he hadn't, but he wouldn't. He said, if I know I can't pretend I don't." David's stomach tightened as he read that line again and again. His son, his brilliant, stubborn, good-hearted son, had stumbled into something far more dangerous than anyone had led David to believe. The next page contained names and numbers, many of which meant nothing to him, until one stood out, Henry W. Underneath it, Eleanor had scribbled, "He offered protection, but he's changed. I don't trust him now." David's memory scanned through every board meeting, every contract, and a faint recollection surfaced. Henry Whitmore, Board of Trustees, retired mysteriously in 2015. No warning, no reason. David had barely questioned it then, consumed by grief, but now the timing was a dagger to the chest. He turned another page. "They think if I disappear, it all disappears, but I won't let them bury me." that easily. The final entry was more rushed, the handwriting crooked and jagged. The ink looked smudged, like she had written it with shaking hands. If something happens to me, the truth is with Lily. That was it. No explanation, no follow-up, just the name, Lily. David stared at the word, mind. Racing. Could it be? The girl in the cemetery, the one who placed the flower on Michael's grave with a familiarity that defied chance. Could she be the Lily Eleanor wrote about? His granddaughter. His fingers trembled around the diary, his thoughts spiraling. The pieces were forming a shape he couldn't ignore. Eleanor hadn't just vanished. She had been silenced, and she had left behind more than questions. She had left behind a living legacy, a child who might be carrying the truth Michael died protecting. David closed the diary gently, as if holding the last words of a dying woman, and swore under his breath, "I'm going to find her, and I will protect her." Back at the estate, David gathered every file he had on the board of Callaway Industries. Names, signatures, access logs, anything that might link Henry Whitmore or anyone else to the internal fraud Eleanor hinted at. The more he dug, the more the cracks widened. Missing reports, duplicate payments, fake shell companies tied to third-party consulting groups that Eleanor's audit division had flagged in an internal report that was never published. David's eyes burned with rage and shame. He had signed off on most of these budgets, trusted the numbers, trusted the men. But behind the spreadsheets and polished quarterly reviews had been something darker, rotting the company from within. And Michael, God help him, had seen it, had tried to act, and maybe that had cost him his life. For years, David believed his son had overdosed alone, in silence. But now he was beginning to see it. Michael had been silenced too, just like Eleanor, just like Lily might be next, if he didn't act. "Marcus," David said as soon as the call connected, "I need you to find someone. Her name is Lily, no surname. Possibly born between 2014 and 2015. Cross-reference anyone connected to Eleanor Davis. Use adoption records, school registrations, whatever you can." Marcus didn't question him. "I'll start immediately." David hung up and looked again at the diary. There were dried tears on the pages, stains that could only come from fear and desperation. Eleanor had been alone, outnumbered and pregnant, hunted by the very people David once called partners. He couldn't shake the image of her writing in this tiny apartment, every word a prayer for a child she might never see grow up. And that child, Lily, was out there, possibly alone, possibly in danger. She knew something, or maybe she didn't yet, but others might suspect she did, and if they came for her, David would be the only shield left standing. Not as a CEO, not even as a father, but as a man who refused to let another innocent be lost in silence. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Marcus, unusually out of breath. "You need to see this," he said, handing David a printed document. "It's from a private foster care registry. A girl named Lily Davis, no known parents. Placed in a rural foster home 6 years ago. She ran away last year. They've been looking for her since." David's heart pounded. "Where?" "Outside Redwood, near the old train station." David closed his eyes. Redwood was only 2 hours away. That cemetery, the girl, it all aligned. Lily had come back, not to be found, but to say something, to show herself. David stood, grabbing his coat. "Get the car. We leave now." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, what are you going to do when you find her?" David didn't answer immediately. He looked at the diary again, Eleanor's last words echoing in his mind. "The truth is with Lily." He clenched his jaw. "I'm going to listen. For the first time in 11 years, I'm going to stop assuming, and I'm going to listen." As the car sped down the highway, David's thoughts became a storm of memories, regrets, and realizations. He had spent years building empires, commanding boardrooms, dictating the future of entire industries. But when it came to his own family, He had missed everything that mattered. Eleanor had worked for him, Michael had tried to reach him, and now a child he'd never met might hold the answers none of his billions could buy. When they reached Redwood, he didn't wait for protocol or introductions. He stepped out and scanned the train station perimeter, remembering the last place the girl had vanished. There were shadows there, figurative and real, and he would search every one of them until Lily was found. Somewhere deep inside him, the grief that had ruled him for years was transforming into something else. Not vengeance, not yet, but resolve. He wouldn't let this story end with silence again, because now he knew. Lily wasn't just a visitor. She was family, and someone had tried to bury her along with the truth. That would be their last mistake. "You're a harder man to find than I expected," David said, stepping across the polished floor of the nursing facility lobby, where Henry Wilson sat waiting with an expression that danced between defiance and guilt. The former company attorney looked older than David remembered, thinner, more fragile. But there was still a sharpness in his eyes that hadn't dulled with age. "You always did enjoy a good hunt," Henry replied, motioning to the empty seat across from him. David sat without ceremony, dropping a manila envelope onto the table between them. "I know about Eleanor, about Michael, about what happened behind my back. You're going to tell me everything." Henry exhaled through his nose, silent for a long time. "I warned them," he muttered, not meeting David's gaze. "Told them you weren't as blind as you pretended to be. But greed makes people sloppy." David's jaw tightened. "Who gave the orders?" Henry finally looked up. "The board. Not all, but enough. They were scared. Your son was bright. Too bright. And Eleanor? She was a bomb waiting to go off." David clenched his fists. "So they killed him?" Henry didn't flinch. "They neutralized a risk. That's how they phrased it. I buried the details. That was my job." David's throat burned as if he had swallowed glass. "You helped them," he whispered, more accusation than question. Henry nodded once, slowly. "Yes, but I didn't kill him. I cleaned up after. That's what they paid me for." David stood abruptly, pushing his chair back with force. "You knew he was my son, and I knew you were their leader," Henry said calmly. "They assumed your silence was consent. That's the irony, isn't it? They trusted your absence more than your presence." David's hands trembled at his sides. "You're going to fix this. Every record, every detail." Henry held up a hand. "There's nothing left to fix. Not in the way you want. But I kept one thing, something he gave me. I didn't know what to do with it, so I locked it away." David narrowed his eyes. "What?" Henry reached down, pulling a small leather briefcase from beneath his chair. He placed it on the table between them with deliberate care. "A file. Your son's file. Documents, voice recordings, names, places. He was gathering evidence. Thought he could blow the whistle. That was his mistake. He didn't know who he was up against." David slowly reached for the case, afraid of what he might find inside. "I remember the day he came to me," Henry continued, his voice low, as if confessing to a priest. "He wasn't scared. He was angry. Said the company was rotten. Said he had proof. Wanted me to help him go public. I told him he was insane, that they'd eat him. Alive. But he was determined." David opened the briefcase slowly. Inside, neatly organized, were documents bearing company seals, offshore account transfers, manipulated contracts, evidence of laundering, international bribery, all signed off by board members he had once called friends. Underneath, the papers, a flash drive in a plastic sleeve. "That's the worst of it," Henry said, pointing to the drive. "Audio, meetings, conversations. They didn't know he was recording them." David's breath caught in his chest. "Why give this to me now?" Henry looked weary. "Because I'm dying, and because whatever happens next, you need to know what your son died for." David closed the briefcase gently, feeling like he had just sealed a casket. "What about Eleanor?" he asked. "She was a problem," Henry replied. "After Michael died, they wanted to be sure she wouldn't talk. That's when Victor Hale got involved." David's stomach turned. "Who is he?" Victor Hale was the man they used when silence had to be permanent, Henry said, voice colder now. Private security, ex-intelligence, no paper trail. He makes people vanish, no loose ends. David's pulse surged. You're telling me he killed her? Henry shook his head. I'm telling you I don't know. But she went off the radar right after his name showed up in the internal memos. That's not a coincidence. David stood again, slower this time. And Lily? Henry hesitated. I don't know how she survived or where she's been hiding. But if she's resurfaced, Victor will find out. And when he does, his voice trailed off. David's hands tightened around the handle of the briefcase. Then I need to find her first. Henry looked up, regret in his eyes. You're already too late. David turned to leave. We'll see. As he reached the door, Henry called out. One more thing. The man who pulled the final strings wasn't on the board. David paused. Then who was it? Henry stared at him. Your CFO, James Loring. He ran the operation. Every transaction went through him. David left without replying. The past had just named a new enemy. Back in his car, David stared at the briefcase on the seat beside him, a symbol of everything he had failed to protect. The evidence Michael had died to collect was now in his hands, and it burned like a brand. He hadn't just been blind, he had been complicit, a figurehead in a company ruled by shadows. He thought of Eleanor, of her diary, of her desperation. She had trusted no one, and now he understood why. She had watched the empire from the inside and seen its rot, and Michael, always too principled for his own good, had inherited that courage, but neither of them had the power to change it. David did, or at least he had once. The thought sickened him. He couldn't change the past, but he could destroy the future those men were building atop bones and lies. He opened the briefcase again, pulled out the flash drive, and inserted it into the console. A voice filled the car, Michael's voice, clear and steady. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it. David closed his eyes. The war had begun, and this time he would not stand by. The recordings were worse than he imagined. Voices of men he had dined with, trusted, strategized with, casually discussing asset manipulation, fake, partnerships, contracts rewritten in backrooms. One voice, unmistakably James Loring's, spoke with venom. Michael's getting too close. He's young, idealistic. We need to move the timeline. Another replied, what about the girl? James answered, handle her. Quietly. David paused the playback, bile rising in his throat. These weren't suspicions. These were executions, carefully worded but undeniable. He copied the files to a secure drive, then placed the original back in the briefcase. The next move had to be calculated. If Victor Hale was still active, then finding Lily was not just a moral imperative. It was a matter of life and death. He called Marcus. I need security, private, off-grid. We're tracking someone dangerous. Marcus didn't ask questions. He never did. David had always relied on him for discretion, but this time it wouldn't be enough. The truth had weight, and he would need allies who could carry it. Michael had started something. Now it was up to David to finish it, even if it meant burning down the house he'd spent his life building. The next morning, David met with his legal counsel in secret. Not the corporate sharks he kept on retainer, but a man named Ernest Patel, someone David trusted when discretion mattered more than law. Ernest listened in silence as David explained what he had learned. If you go public with this, Ernest said carefully, you'll bring the company down. Lawsuits, investigations. You'll lose everything. David didn't hesitate, then let it fall. Ernest raised an eyebrow. And Lily? David's expression darkened. She comes first, before the board, before the company, before me. Ernest nodded. Then I'll help, but you need a plan. If Victor Hale is involved, this won't be resolved in court. David agreed. Start gathering names, journalists, prosecutors, anyone who still has a spine. He handed over a copy of the files. If anything happens to me, this goes to the press. Ernest took it without a word. David turned to the window. In the distance, the skyline of the empire he built rose like a monument to ignorance. He had believed himself in control, but he was never steering. He was a passenger, and the time had come to take the wheel or crash the whole thing trying. By evening, David sat alone in the study, the briefcase on his lap, the weight of Michael's legacy anchoring him. He listened again to the recordings, absorbing each phrase, each voice, each betrayal. The pieces were aligning. Victor Hale had eliminated threats. James Loring had orchestrated operations. Eleanor had known. Michael had uncovered too much. And Lily had survived. That meant someone had failed to finish the job, or someone had protected her. Either way, she was the key. He picked up the phone and called Marcus again. "We're going to Redwood," he said. "Tonight." Quietly. He hung up before the man could respond. He stared at a photo on the shelf, Michael smiling, unaware of the wolves behind him. David ran a thumb over the glass. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "but I see it now. All of it." As he stood, the house around him felt colder, smaller, like a tomb he no longer belonged to. The next steps would be dangerous, but he had already lost everything that mattered once. He wouldn't let history repeat. This time he would fight, not for justice, not for redemption, but for the girl who carried Michael's eyes, and maybe his soul. "She's in Newark," said Detective Paul Mendez, his eyes not leaving the report in his hand as he handed it to David across the table. "Lives under the name Lily Davis, same name as the one from the registry. Raised by a woman named Carla Reynolds. No official adoption, more like a protective arrangement. Carla was close to Eleanor. It all fits." David took the file and scanned it quickly, his heart racing at the confirmation. A recent photo was clipped to the report. A girl of 12, thin, with tightly coiled hair, and a gaze that defied her age. There was something in her posture that spoke of defense, of someone always ready to run. David pointed to the address. "She's still there?" Mendez nodded. "For now, but the foster system's closing in. If you don't make contact soon, they'll move her." David stood. "Then I'll go now." He drove himself, refusing the quiet luxury of his usual driver. When he arrived at the small duplex on the outskirts of Newark, he parked a block away and waited. An hour later, he saw her. Lily stepped out of the house carrying a backpack too big for her shoulders. David exited the car, heart pounding. "Lily!" he called, not too loudly. She turned. Their eyes met, and she ran. David chased her only long enough to know he wouldn't catch her, then stopped. "Wait, please, I'm not here to hurt you," he shouted, breathless. She ducked behind a parked car, watching him with eyes wide in terror. He reached slowly into his coat pocket and pulled out the silver medallion, holding it up in the open. "I have this. You left it at the cemetery." Her expression shifted. Confusion now. She emerged slightly, hesitantly. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, voice small but firm. "You dropped it," David said. "On Michael's grave." At the sound of the name, her head tilted. "Michael," she whispered. "You knew him." David stepped closer, careful. "He was my son." That froze her. She looked from the medallion to his face, then back again. "That's my father's name," she said, uncertain. "But I never met him. Mama didn't talk about him much." Her body remained poised to flee, but something cracked in her tone, curiosity. "I'm David," he said gently. "Your grandfather." Silence stretched between them. Then, in a voice barely audible, she said, "Mama said he died before I was born. She hid his pictures, but I found one. He had eyes like mine." They sat on a bench outside a closed laundromat, a compromise between her desire to run and his need to stay close. "She used to tell me we were safer when no one knew who we were," Lily said, her knees tucked up to her chest. "She always looked over her shoulder. She said bad men were still out there." David listened without interrupting, his chest tightening with each word. "When I was 5, she continued, "Mama left one day and didn't come back. Carla said she was trying to protect me. We moved a lot, never stayed anywhere too long." David fought the urge to reach out. think your mother was right to be afraid, he said. I've learned things about what happened to her, to Michael. You've been through so much, Lily. I'm so sorry. She looked at him, skeptical. Why now? Because I didn't know, he admitted. I didn't see what they did to him, to her. But I see now, and I want to protect you. She studied him carefully. Mama said to never trust people with power. She was right, he said quietly. But I don't want power anymore. I just want to know you. After long silence, Lily reached into her backpack and pulled out a worn shoebox, the cardboard taped, and re-taped at the corners. Carla said to give this to you if you ever came, she murmured. Mama told her to keep it safe. David took the box, slowly, reverently. Inside was a flash drive and a folded letter, its paper yellowed slightly with time. His fingers trembled as he unfolded the note. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and I'm sorry. I wanted to raise her myself, to see her grow, but I couldn't keep her safe and speak the truth at the same time. I chose the truth. Tears threatened his vision, but he forced himself to continue reading. Michael was braver than all of us. He died trying to protect what we all ignored. If they come for Lily, they'll come fast. But I believe in you, David. If anyone can protect her now, it's you. Just don't wait too long to love her. The last sentence crushed him. He looked at Lily, who now seemed smaller, more fragile. She never stopped. Never. Loving you, he whispered. Lily didn't reply, but she didn't walk away either. Back at the estate, Lily wandered through the halls cautiously, her eyes scanning the photographs, the velvet-lined furniture, the towering shelves of books she couldn't reach. It's too quiet here, she said. I'm not used to quiet. David watched her from the study doorway. Would you like music? She shook her head. I just need a minute. He nodded. Take all the minutes you need. She eventually followed him into the study, perching on the edge of a leather chair. Do you believe she's really gone? Lily asked. David exhaled slowly. I don't want to, but yes, I think they made sure of it. Her face hardened. Then I want to see what she left, the truth. He placed the flash drive into the computer, glancing once at her, then pressing play. The screen flickered. A room came into view. Michael sat, alone, older than in any photo David had seen, his eyes serious, voice steady. If you're watching this, he began, then I didn't make it. And if Lily is alive, then you need to protect her, because the people behind this won't stop. The video continued, Michael naming names, laying out the structure of the corruption with the clarity of someone who had connected every thread. He detailed the accounts, the falsified contracts, and the roles played by key figures, James Loring, Victor Hale, and others from the board. I trusted some of them, he said, until I saw what they were willing to do to protect the illusion. Eleanor found the first breach. I kept digging. They tried to scare me off. Then they tried to bribe me. When that didn't work, they planned to make me disappear. His face darkened. They used Victor for that. David felt the blood drain from his face. He had heard the name before, but hearing it from his son's mouth was like a wound reopening. Lily watched silently, gripping the armrest. They told Eleanor she was next. That's when she left. She knew they'd never stop. That's why she kept Lily hidden. That's why I'm speaking now. The screen froze at the end. Michael's eyes locked on the camera. David shut the laptop. For a moment, there was only stillness between them. Then Lily asked, "What do we do now?" David didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window, his mind racing. "We do what your parents tried to do," he finally said. "We finish what they started. We tell the truth." Lily approached him, her voice small. "But they'll come after us." He turned to her, eyes steady. "Then we make sure they regret it." She nodded, lips trembling. "Okay." In that word, he heard a lifetime of inherited courage, Eleanor's defiance, Michael's resolve, and now Lily's reluctant strength. "We'll go public," he continued. "We'll give this to the right people, with protection in place, but we'll do it smart. No announcements, no warnings." Lily looked uncertain. "Do you think she knew this would happen?" "Yes," David said. "She knew someone had to carry the weight. She just hoped it wouldn't fall on you." Lily took his hand. Too late for that now. David squeezed her fingers gently. Then we carry it together. They stood like that for a long time, grandfather and granddaughter, bound by blood, loss, and a truth too dangerous to ignore. As night fell, Lily lay curled on the guest room bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. David sat just outside the door, guarding the hallway like a sentinel, not from intruders yet, but from memory. He knew what the next steps meant: legal war, media backlash, personal danger, but none of it compared to what had already been lost. In a room down the hall, Eleanor's letter lay open beside Michael's drive. Two voices from the grave, whispering the same message: finish this. He rose, walked to his study, and began writing names. Strategists, journalists, prosecutors, allies. He would use every resource he had left, for her, for them. The truth was now theirs to carry, and if the storm was coming, David Calloway would meet it standing. "You will all remain seated until I'm finished," David said, his voice cutting clean through the hum of hushed whispers in the boardroom. The long, polished table of the Calloway Industries executive floor, once a symbol of his empire's dominance, now felt more like a courtroom. And he, not the chairman, was holding court. 12 members sat before him, eyes ranging from confusion to defensiveness. Charles Denton, the current CFO, and the only one who dared to challenge David's authority openly, adjusted his tie with performative ease. "David, if this is about old rumors, I suggest we handle this with proper internal protocol." "This isn't about rumors," David snapped. "It's about the truth, the kind that was buried alongside my son." He pulled a flash drive from his jacket and inserted it into the console. The room dimmed slightly as the projector flickered to life. And then Michael's face appeared. Every whisper died. "If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it." Michael's voice filled the room, and with it, the tension turned suffocating. Names, accounts, directives. Every board member sat frozen as the damning evidence unraveled in real time. By the time the video ended, no one was breathing normally. Denton stood first. "This is fabricated," he said quickly, the confidence cracking in his tone. "We don't know when this was recorded or whether—" David raised a hand. "The dates align, the financial trails are traceable, and the voices, you'll find your own in there, Charles." He clicked to another file. A recorded meeting with Denton, clearly discussing how certain projects needed to be offloaded discreetly. Denton's face drained of color. A few board members looked away, suddenly unwilling to defend a man whose lies had just become visible in HD. "I trusted this company," David continued, his tone lower, heavier, "but I see now what it became under my absence. A machine built to enrich itself through silence, corruption, and blood. My son tried to stop it. You let him die for it." One woman, a legal advisor named Marla Chen, leaned forward. "David, what do you want?" He looked at each of them slowly, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. "Justice. Not for me, for Michael, for Eleanor, and for a child you never knew existed, my granddaughter, who's been hunted without ever knowing why." The silence that followed was shock. It was fear. "I'm assembling an external task force," David continued. "Federal prosecutors, independent auditors, investigative journalists. Everything in these files will be released to them." Murmurs rose immediately. "You can't do that," Denton barked. "We'll lose every investor we have." "Then lose them," David said sharply. "This company was built to last because it was built on truth. If it falls now, it's because you poisoned its foundation." He turned to the screen again and played a clip showing wire transfers to offshore accounts under names Denton couldn't deny. "You didn't just steal money, you stole lives." Marla, more composed than the others, asked, "What about you, David? Where does this leave you?" He stepped back from the console, expression unreadable. "Exactly where I need to be. I will not be the face of this company again, but I will be its reckoning. And you," he pointed at Denton, "are done." Security guards entered as if on cue. "Mr. Denton, please come with us," one said. Denton didn't resist. He only glared at David with a hatred that promised unfinished battles. But David had stopped fearing men like Denton. There was a far greater shadow still, lurking. As the boardroom cleared, David remained standing alone. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He answered without looking. "Yes, it's done," said Ernest Patel, his private legal advisor. "The files have been submitted to the federal inquiry. We'll receive contact by morning." David nodded to himself. "Then we've begun." He stared at the now blank screen where Michael's face had just been. There were more names to chase, more layers to peel, but the first strike had landed. He walked out of the boardroom, passing portraits of past CEOs, his own face among them. He didn't feel like a founder anymore. He felt like a man rising from ruins. In the hallway, he dialed Lily. She answered on the second ring. "Grandpa?" Her voice was small, but steady. "It started," David said. "I played the videos, showed them who your father really was, who your mother tried to protect. The justice they stole begins now, and I need you beside me." There was a pause, and then her soft answer came. "I'm ready." David smiled faintly, walking through the glass doors like a man reborn. For the first time in years, the burden didn't feel quite so heavy. In a location far from any city map, a man watched the boardroom meeting from the feed of a satellite link. The laptop's screen reflected cold eyes. Victor Hale didn't blink. He watched as Michael's face lit up the room, as Denton fell apart, as David reclaimed the house he once built with quiet vengeance. So the old man finally woke up, he muttered. His fingers tapped the table rhythmically, a tic he'd had for years. Another screen beside him displayed Lily's file. He enlarged her photo, tilting his head slightly. "She's just a girl," he said to no one. "But she's the key now." A voice crackled through the speaker. "Do you want us to move?" He didn't answer immediately. "Not yet. Let them think they're winning. Let them think they're safe." The voice responded, "As you wish." Victor closed the laptop and stood, stretching his arms slowly. Michael played his hand. Eleanor played hers. "Now it's mine." He walked toward a reinforced door at the end of the room. Inside, rows of archived files lined the walls. Names, contracts, footage, secrets. "No more hiding," he said under his breath. "Time to finish what I started." Meanwhile, David returned to the estate where Lily waited, seated cross-legged in the study, flipping through documents with the focus of someone far beyond her years. When he entered, she stood up quickly. "Was it bad?" she asked. He shook his head. "It was necessary." He handed her the same letter Eleanor had once written. "They know now. They saw your father. They heard him." Lily's eyes filled with something between relief and pain. "Then he's not just a name anymore." David sat beside her. "No, he's a warning and an example." They spent the next hours organizing timelines, placing names into a wall chart. Lily pointed at Victor's name. "He's still alive, isn't he?" David hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, and he's watching us." She looked up. "Then we keep moving." Her voice was calm, unwavering. "He took everything from us. We won't let him take the end too." David looked at her, pride swelling in his chest. "You sound just like him." "Then maybe I'm ready," she said. "Not to run, to fight." They shook hands, no longer just family, but allies in a battle older than she'd ever imagined. News broke the next day. Headlines flooded the networks. Callaway Industries under federal investigation. Whistleblower files reveal decade-long conspiracy. David gave no statements, issued no press releases. He simply watched from the estate's balcony, Lily beside him. When reporters arrived at the gate, he let them wait. The world would know the story, but on his terms. Inside, Ernest worked with a growing team of former journalists and prosecutors, each building the case that would reshape everything the company represented. But David had eyes on only one outcome: truth and safety for the girl beside him. She had become the symbol of a generation left in the dark, and now she would lead them into the light. That evening, they sat beside the fireplace. Lily placed the medallion on the table between them. This was the beginning. she said. David nodded. "And now comes the end." They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. The war had begun, but so had the healing. Here on our channel, we create each story with great care, thinking of you, our viewer who feels every moment with us. Putting together content like this takes time, research, and a lot of dedication, but it's all worth it knowing there's someone special on the other side watching. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to our channel. It truly helps us keep bringing more stories that inspire, touch hearts, and make us reflect. Take a moment to explore our other videos too. Each one is crafted with the same attention and love. And tell us in the comments, what did this story awaken in you? Your voice matters here. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you in the next chapter.